Hi there. So I thought we'd do one last story. I'm going to take this book back. We've had some good views on it, just not as much as I'd like. So let's do one last story out of this book and see if we have any interest in other ones. So today's story is called Toronto. The celebrated Canadian geographer Cole Harris once described the inhabited part of Canada as an island archipelago spread over 4,000 east-west miles. Professor Harris's archipelago spreads farther if you factor in all the islands of the Great North, and is as thoughtful and encompassing a description of Canada as any, and better than most. It accommodates both the distance and differences that make Canada so surprisingly watertight. As an analogy, it holds up well when measured against the rocky shores of our main cultures, against the still waters of our tolerance, and against all the other tidal surges that both pull us apart and push us back together, endlessly and relentlessly. I like how it makes me think about Canada, but also I should say I like how it allows me to think about myself. Because if we are a chain of islands stretched along the border, well, that makes me the island hopper, and I have to say I like the sound of that. I spend a good part of my life these days hopping around the country, but when I'm not hopping, that is, Toronto is the place I return to. Toronto is my home, and when I come home, I always feel a little like I am leaving the islands and returning to the mainland, which is, I suppose, how you should feel about coming home. Wherever your home is, whether it be a city home, a country home, or a big town, or a small one, or even on an island, home should feel like solid ground. Very true. This city hasn't always been my home. I was born and raised on an island of Montreal. I know Montreal the way you know the town of your boyhood. I know it intuitively. Toronto is a city I had to learn. I came some 30 years ago because CBC Radio asked me to. I came for my work. I didn't give my coming, or more importantly, my leaving, a moment's thought. I departed Montreal on the waves of my youthful enthusiasm. Although, like so many others who leave their hometowns, I left believing it would only be a year or two before I returned. But those years add up, and now all these years later, I find that I have lived in Toronto longer than I lived in the city where I was born. Toronto is now my home, and whether I admit it or not, it is my home by choice. And I travel across the country and talk turns to hometowns. People often look at me with compassion, and they learn where I live. "Oh, I wouldn't want to live there," they say. Often they don't say it quite that directly, but I can see it in their eyes and hear it in the things they choose to tell me about their hometowns. I wouldn't want to live in a place where you don't know your neighbors, where people are in such a hurry, where the driving is so impossible. I counted 16 lanes on that highway near the airport. Well, yes, it is heavy lifting, living in a big city. No doubt about that, but not in the way those who don't live in one might think. This city asks a lot of those of us who live here, but there is much to love too. Like all the other islands in the Canadian archipelago, Toronto has a romance with water. It is built on the shore of a lake and organized around the banks of two rivers. The Don and the Humber still wander pleasantly through the city, and if you wander along their banks or through any of their many ravines that bisect the city, you can run into deer, coyote, rabbits, fox, and skunk right in the heart of town. More than the gentle slope of the hills leading down from the old lakeshore to the shore of the lake, more than the streets or the streetcars or the swoop or the Don Valley Parkway at night, all soft and yellow and winding, more than the gracious parks on the grinding parking lot, more than the cornerstones or the late night stores, more than the stock markets or the St. Lawrence markets, or the meat markets, or more than the low rises or the high rises, the theaters on King and the galleries on Queen, more than 1, 2, 3, 4 newspapers, more than the Blue Jays or the Maple Leafs, the Stanley Cup or the World Series, more than the restaurants and the cafes, more than these things or any number of other things any of us could name. Toronto is a conversation. It is a conversation that began before any of us were born, back when the Don River ran clean and clear, a conversation that began before us and continues with and without us every hour of the day. And this is what this city asks of us. This is the heavy lifting. I asked that we participate in the conversation, more than ask. It demands that of us. And it is through this great civic conversation that the city lives. Those of us concerned with the natural world talk about the parks and the rivers and the quiet places, the street corners and the canopy of trees. Others of us taken up by the world of commerce, concern ourselves with buildings and and the getting and the spending of time and money. And no matter, because whichever one I am, what my neighbors want to know is, where do I stand on the idea of Island Airport? An expanded subway, swimming pools in the schools, green bins and blue bins? And when I'm sure of my opinion, when I have thought about it and talked about it, and when I have figured it all out, and I am standing at the finish line all huffing and puffing and proud, that's when the city tells me to tie up my shoes and keep running. I am not close to the finish line. Because once I know where I stand on these and any number of other things, the city requires something more of me. It requires me to accommodate where others stand. Where they stand on this and on that, and also on music played late at night, and when sidewalks should be shoveled, and where and how one parks one's car. This is what the city asks of us. It asks us to participate in the grand conversation, and then, when we do, to be mindful of the others who are talking to accommodate them and their different ways and their voices of many language. This may be an urban jungle, but the ecology here is more swamp than forest. It is rich and fetid and varied and different, and you have to look a little harder to see the beauty here. Away from the mountains and the forests and the pristine lakes. But if you can catch the light just right, the beauty can be just as dazzling. I don't think there is a nicer thing in the world than a morning walk in a Toronto neighborhood. As any neighborhood will do, the city is full of them. Or any neighborhood will do, the city is full of them. A walk in Toronto is especially lovely if it is late in the summer and there are trees arcing over the sidewalks and the odd corner store and boxes of grapes and circles of unshaven Italian men in their dress pants and vests getting ready to make wine. I had to leave town soon after I moved into the first house where I live today. I moved in, stayed for a couple of weeks, and then I had to go away. I had been gone maybe a week when I received a phone call from one of my new neighbors. You left the window open of your car, she said. Is it going to rain? Can I get the key and close it? There was no way that she could do that. The car will just have to get wet, I said. It will be okay. Things will get dry. Or things that get wet will dry. When I got home, I found my car covered with tarpaulin, but not by the neighbor who had called, by another one, who had also taken stock of my predicament. The thing is, I do know my neighbors. The thing is, when it comes down to it, we all live in small towns. Mine happens to be in the heart of the city. I follow to my own footsteps back and forth to Peter's little butcher shop, to Potter's grocery store, over the Herman's hardware and Sal's where I get produce, to the place that I go to get my hair cut, and the coffee shop up the street. They know me in these places, and I know them. This is my home, and yes, sometimes living here is hard work, But maybe the thing about the city is that it asks so much of me, because the thing it asks is for me to be my best self, to be a citizen. We are so blessed to be here, to have so much when so many have so little, to live by God's grace in a wonderful country, and by great good luck to be part of the conversation that is Toronto. That's a very cute little story, and I happen to have some family in Toronto, so yeah, that was very interesting and fun to read, and I hope you enjoyed it. We'll see what we can find for another book, folks, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching.